Alright everyone, today we have a cracked, bent, destroyed iPad. This iPad has seen better days. It is an iPad Air, Generation 3, model number A2152. And that is on the back of these iPads in small letters. You can find your model number. They all start with the letter A. You're going to need a heat gun. You can use a hairdryer, but a heat gun works 10 times better than a hairdryer will. You're going to need a Phillips screwdriver. This is a Wowstick. I'll leave a link in the description. This little tool is pretty freaking awesome. But you can use a small Phillips screwdriver as well. That'll get the job done. And you're going to need a pry tool, super important. I'll leave a link in the description of this iSesamo tool. This is a tool that's used all the time. And some anti-static tweezers. I wouldn't use regular tweezers. I just wouldn't do it. Double-sided 3M tape. And you're going to need a cutting tool. You don't have to use that. You can use anything to cut it with. So the first thing you really want to do is you're going to heat around the edges. And if you have this heat gun, like I said, you just keep going around the edges. And this will loosen the adhesive, so when you start prying, it makes it 10 times easier to pull loose. Always make sure that you power off the iPad. I didn't, so I did it now. So you're going to take your Sesamo tool and you're going to go around the edges. And like I said, if you heat this around the edges, it makes it a lot easier. The adhesive gets sticky, it gets loose, and it'll pop up. If your iPad is broken really bad, this sometimes will break off in pieces. But on this model, all the cables are at the very bottom, so you don't have to worry about the sides or the top or anything about you cutting anything off. And on this particular model, the LCD and the screen are basically glued together. So this screen, when you get a new one, will cost a little bit more because the LCD and the digitizer are glued together. So down here at the bottom, if it starts sticking or anything, you can get your heat gun, you can heat it up a little bit more. It will help it loosen, and you can pry it off 10 times easier. So that's what I'm doing. You don't want to do it too much, but you do want to get it to where it's kind of hot to the touch. But like I said, this pry tool is pretty awesome. These tools I'm using, I'll leave a link in the description. They're not expensive at all. I think the most expensive thing is the heat gun. It's like $25. But the pry tool's like $5. The screwdriver's like $5. You're not going to spend a fortune on these, especially if you fix more than one of these. It'll definitely pay for itself. So this is kind of a bad angle, but there's 2 Phillips screws that you're going to need to remove, and there's this little bitty shield, and it's just holding the cables down to your LCD and your digitizer, but I can't flip this all the way. So once you take off the shield and the 2 screws, there's going to be 2 cables, and you're just going to pry those 2 cables up. I just use my fingernails. Some people don't like that. I've never had any problems with it, so I just use my fingernails. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to remove the glass that's around the edges. This is super important. For example, if you leave a little piece of glass and when you're putting down your new screen, you put a little bit too much pressure in that one spot because you're like, why is it going down? And it shatters your whole screen. So make sure that you take your time. A lot of this video is sped up just so I don't bore you. But please pause the video, take your time. Pulling this glass off the edges is very important. If you want to wear gloves, wear gloves. I don't like to wear gloves. I like to feel the edges. I like to feel the glass when it sticks into my hands. I don't like to wear gloves. I can't use them. I just haven't had luck with gloves, so I don't use them, but I would recommend them. I just don't do it. Like I said, I'm just going around. If you get a piece of glass that seems to be a little bit of a pain, you can just take your heat gun, you can heat it up and pry it off, but make sure all pieces of glass are pulled off. You can even take your iPad and kind of put it the other direction and kind of hit it on the table a little bit and make sure all pieces of glass didn't accidentally fall in the middle of the iPad or anything. But once you've done that, I'm going to try to bend this iPad back carefully because the motherboard is actually in the middle of this iPad, which makes this a little bit easier for me to bend. So the batteries are on the edges, and the batteries do give a little bit. So normally I would take the motherboard out so I wouldn't damage the motherboard, but the motherboard is like right in the middle on this iPad, so I felt a little more comfortable bending it without taking the motherboard out. But this was bent pretty good, and I felt like with just a little adjustments I got it pretty straight. Because if you put a new screen on one of these bent iPads, it's not gonna sit flush. You gotta think it's bent and you're trying to put something flat on it. It's not gonna sit flush. You're gonna have a gap. So make sure you get that just as good as you can. Don't overdo it. You don't want to break the battery in half or bust your motherboard or anything like that. But just do it enough. Now I'm taking my 3M double-sided tape and I'm just going around the edges. And when you take the adhesive off, you'll kind of be able to see where the adhesive was that was originally on the iPad. It's not all over the iPad. You don't put it on the batteries. You don't put it on anything. You don't put it on this metal. You just put it around the edges. It doesn't really seem like that would be enough to hold this iPad down, but that's it. I mean, that's really all it is to hold this iPad down. So don't add more adhesive. Just the adhesive, if you can tell around this iPad, is that white tape that's going around the outer edges. I mean, you don't add any more than you need to. Make sure you get the corners. You'll be able to see I kind of leave right here. I'm cutting a little bitty piece to put in that corner. So I like to make sure I get those corners because corners are important. On this iPad, the corners were not damaged, so it was real easy to put this screen back. Sometimes the corners are damaged, and you're gonna have to kind of pound out the corners with like a little screwdriver. So just be kind of careful with those. Or you can just tell the customer, hey, look, your iPad corner is in really bad shape. I just want to give you a heads up that, this corner is not gonna sit right if you don't want to try to pound out the corners. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to remove this home button. I don't know why my zoom was not working, but it would not zoom in. It would zoom in, just not correctly. But there's a little bitty flap on this home button that you're going to take off, and other than that, you're just going to pry up on the home button. It's actually pretty simple. There's not a lot to it. You don't remove any special cables or anything like that. I just heated the front just a little bit. Got underneath, you'll be able to see there's like this little L bracket that's holding the iPad home button in place. If you can just get your tweezers underneath that L bracket and pull up, it'll come right off. On each side of that little bracket, it's just got glue. That's all it is. It's just adhesive holding it down. And you're gonna toss the old screen out. You're gonna grab the new screen, and you're gonna take that home button that you just barely took off. So the adhesive is still, still ready. And you're gonna just put that home button down the exact same way that you took it out of your other screen. And then you're gonna connect your little flap, and you'll see it on there. Like I said, I apologize, I couldn't zoom in. I don't know what's up with my camera, but it's just not letting me zoom in. It'll zoom in, but it like zooms into the corner. So I'm gonna have to get it checked out, so I apologize. But if you just put the home button on the exact way you took it off, it's really simple. There's really not a lot to it. This little flap right here, it's a little connection that you basically pull in. Sometimes it's a little bit of a pain, so you do have to go slow. Some people can get this so fast, but with me, it seems like it's always a little bit of a hassle. But like I said, once again, this video is sped up. Do not rush this. You can damage the cable. You can bend the cable too much. Just take your time and go slow. That's the most important thing, to be honest. But if you can do this yourself, you're going to save yourself a lot of money. So I want to test this iPad out now, and I don't want to, glue it all back down or tape it back down. So I'm going to put this iPad at an angle because it's the only way you can get these cables to connect. And I'm going to connect the LCD and I'm going to connect the digitizer. And once I get those connected, I'm just going to lay the screen down and I'm going to go ahead and power it on. I want to make sure that this screen is good, that this screen works before I start taking off the tape and mashing down the corners where I can't open this bad boy up again. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just going to power this iPad on. Once you see that Apple logo, it makes you feel all good inside. And if you know the passcode, then great. If you don't know the passcode, which I don't ever ask for the passcode on any of these iPads I fix, because it's none of my business what's in your iPad. So I basically just press the buttons 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll do an emergency call on phones. But see right there, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 till there's only one spot left. Then I'll back it out. You don't want to put in the wrong code in somebody's iPad. I just push the buttons and make sure they're touching what they're supposed to. Move the screen around a little, and if it functions the way it's supposed to, then more than likely you're good. Because like I said, we're replacing the digitizer and the screen, so everything looked good to me. So I'm pretty happy with it. So we're gonna basically, like I said, I apologize I can't zoom in, but we're gonna put the shield back and we're gonna put the 2 screws back. And it's important when you take these off, I should have mentioned that you just kind of lay them out the way that you pulled them out. It just makes it easier when you're putting everything back. And I apologize I can't show you the screen. The way my camera is and the way the angle of this iPad is, it's just not allowing you to see it, but it's basically a shield and there's 2 screws in this shield. This shield goes over the 2 cables, the LCD and the digitizer cables, and when you screw these 2 screws down, they basically hold those cables in place so they don't pop loose. So that's really what that does, and that's all you're missing right there that you can't see. So now that I have that done, I've tested out my iPad, I feel pretty good about it. I'm going to start taking my tweezers and I'm going to go around, I'm going to start pulling off all this double-sided tape. And before I pull this double-sided tape, take like your finger and go over all the double-sided tape just to push it down just a little bit more, one more time before you pry it up, just to make sure that it's attached to your iPad frame really good. And then once you do that, go ahead and just start prying up all this tape, and be careful that you don't accidentally lay the iPad back on the tape, because then it'll get sticky. So I try to kind of lay it at an angle like that so it's on the outside of the frame and it's not touching the tape. But sometimes it's just going to get on the tape and you're just going to have to realign it. So we're just going to get all this tape off. And once you get all this tape off and you're ready to stick the iPad down, the best way to kind of do this is, this one is, cables are on the bottom. So I'm going to try to line up the bottom first and then I'll go with the top. And when I go to the top, I try to look at the camera hole at the very top where you can do the front-facing camera, and make sure that that lines up. If that lines up, then your iPad screen is usually straight. And I mean, that's really it. Just tap around the edges, make sure everything's down, power this iPad on, and you've done it. You've saved some money. I think the screen is about $120. But I mean, if you can set aside an hour and a half of your time to do this, especially if you've never done it before, that's all it's going to take is an hour and a half. But you will save a lot of money, and hey, maybe you can fix yours and fix somebody else's and make your money back. But I appreciate you guys for watching. If you have any comments or questions or anything like that, please just message me. You won't bother me whatsoever. I love talking about this stuff.